Mhm.
My guest today is Andreas Widmer, an associate professor of practice and entrepreneurship at the Catholic University of America's Busch School of Business. He is a former member of the Swiss Guards, serving under Pope John Paul II, and author of the book The Pope and the CEO, which describes leadership lessons learned. His most recent book is The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, Creating Enduring Value. Andreas Widmer, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. I had the opportunity to meet you and hear you speak at a conference last fall of 2023, and was really captivated by not only your sort of personal journey in education and then to entrepreneurship yourself and then to being a professor of entrepreneurship, but also just your perspectives on where we are in entrepreneurship today. What are some of the sort of tips for aspiring entrepreneurs to think about, particularly as they embark on a path of principled entrepreneurship? And we'll get into that. I think my audience will be particularly interested to hear your strategies about entrepreneurship and maybe possibilities and pitfalls to be aware of. But I'd love to start, Andreas, if we could, with a little bit about your background and experience in education yourself, which has really informed where you are today and the work that you do. So I wonder if you could start with that story.
Yeah, it really has informed that, motivated it. So, as you can tell by my slight accent, I'm actually not from the US. I was born in Switzerland, in Lucerne, Switzerland, the center of Switzerland, and actually in a small village outside of Lucerne, which may have something to do with my experience. I'm the youngest of six kids. Again, my village had 400 people and more cows than people. So it was sort of in the mountains a bit and everything. And, in Switzerland, you have public school. Everybody has the same, and it's mandatory. Homeschooling and other options are not allowed. And I very quickly figured out that I was a rambunctious little guy, very much into the outdoors, and putting me into a room like that was not a good idea. I know this now, but my family, my parents, or even people in that school didn't know at the time that I have a pretty strong ADHD, and I suffer from a strong case of dyslexia, both for numbers and for letters. And that made it just impossible for me to learn to read and write or mathematics in the system that they had, which is the bell curve of teaching to the middle, right? And so I was definitely on the end side of that. And pretty much, I mean, when this happens to you, you go into a school like this, quickly started to think that I was dumb. I mean, I was treated like that. Or I was told that because you have the grades, and I just could not understand what people were trying to teach me. And that led that I could just sort of squeeze by every grade of everything that I had to do. But it left me pretty clueless at the end of my school system, of my schooling that was required there in Switzerland. And the first thing I ever excelled at was the military, because I was a strong boy growing up out there in the mountains and with cows and running around the forest. And I immediately, because they were like, wow, you're really good at this, I started to excel. So we have a militia where everybody has to go to the military, mandatory. And I just excelled because that was on my turf. It was outdoors. It was also educational, but it was outdoors, and it was sort of much more physical. And by the time the teaching came, I was already physically tired, so then my mind could actually work. And I went to the officer school and all that. And that is actually the reason why I entered the Swiss Guards, which is a military, a foreign legion, because I'm like, okay, this is the one thing in life that I mean, what am I going to do with my life? Because I can't, I'm just scholastically totally inadequate and very low self-esteem because of that. If you're as a kid going through and you constantly get judged as being inferior and not measuring up, you get depressed. I literally thought I was stupid by the time I was 20. And I went into the military and then into the Swiss Guards. And of course, they loved me because I'm 6'9", was fit, was was very adequate as a soldier and as a bodyguard with the Swiss Guards. And that's in the Swiss Guards, actually. Sounds funny now, but because of John Paul II, the Pope, I was hanging out with the Pope every day. Everything he does, I do, right? Because you're a bodyguard. And he actually was the first person who started to say, listen, you are special, right? And you have gifts. And what are those gifts? And you're unique and stuff. I'm like, I'm not, I'm unique in a negative way. No, not negatively, positive. And so I started to actually start to see myself, perceive myself in another way because I have received that positive affirmation. And also met my wife there, and then came and made the break and came to America, like in the late 80s, early 90s, and had this amazing experience of first going to school and sort of approaching it with a different attitude. And so I came to America, I learned English, I went to school, and I met these kids up in Boston who started a software company. And they said, hey, you're European, you speak these languages, come in. And I was very blessed. For 3 times I did startups. The first one was FTP Software. We brought the internet to the PC. We're one of those companies. And then Dragon Systems, we invented speech recognition. And I was in internet stuff later on and did some business strategy. So I suddenly found the advantage of actually thinking differently and seeing things differently. And looking back after my career as an entrepreneur, I had one great desire in my heart, and that is how, I always complained about how when I hired people, I hired thousands of people in my companies. I would always complain to my wife in how these people were formed, how they were educated. And so as I retired, she kind of suggested that maybe I should go and, instead of just complaining about it, doing something about it. And that's where the opportunity came up to help start a business school here in Washington, D.C. And we moved in the U.S. I'm from Boston. All my companies were up there. And we moved from Boston to D.C. to help start this business school. And now I have this privilege of trying to be the teacher, trying to be the professor that I wish I had.
Just amazing. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Andreas, about so the burst in American entrepreneurship since 2020, right? That American entrepreneurship had been stagnant for years, and then sort of COVID unleashed a spurt of entrepreneurship that is sustained into this year, largely being led by women and people of color. And it's just exciting to see. I think it was 2023, 5.5 million new business starts, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the most on record since the census began tracking these data. Are you feeling energy in your business school, and especially in your entrepreneurship classes, of young people also gravitating toward the promise of entrepreneurship? What are you seeing there?
I see both. We have, on the one hand, a strong system that likes low risk and security. And so don't make any waves. Don't, go for the security, go blend in and everything. And then you have a whole tribe, let's say, of people who say, no, I've had enough. I want this. I'm looking for deeper meaning in my work. I'm looking for determination myself. And interesting that you say there's, in a sense, minorities. I mean, women are not a minority, actually, but maybe better to say people who are usually excluded from these networks. They're starting to say, you know what? If you don't let me play, I'll start my own game. And I love that, because in a way, that's how I feel, that I'm not the average. I don't fit in a sense. And the best approach you can do to that is to just do this yourself. To start yourself. Schooling is actually the same thing. Just if the school doesn't fit you, just start yourself. Do it yourself. I think that's the ultimate freedom that we have, and we are not very trained in practicing our freedom to that extent, to say, I take responsibility, I'll do this myself. Now, COVID has had the positive effect, I think, and it's just judging from the outside, because I was not one of those people who left the job and started my company during that time. But I think what people started to see is they had time to reflect on their life. I think what people need to realize is that COVID was a break in the sense of how we see ourselves. Suddenly, mortality is something that everybody hears about because there's people dying who shouldn't be dying. And that's a bad thing. But the good thing is it makes us focus on the essential again and say, what is my life all about? That's the most important question you can ask in your life. What is my life about? Is it really my life is about fitting in and doing the corporate job and going to this numbless, mindless job every day? Or should I step up and say, you know what? I'm going to take this risk. I want to be myself. I want to flourish. I want to not just make a living. I want to make a life, you know? And I think a lot of people said, okay, this is my time. And they just took the jump. And the beauty is that it, like you're saying, it's sustaining, right? We see that it's sustainable. We can talk about it separately, but it's still not, we still have a lot of these small companies. And you need this to grow and become SMEs and larger companies. And we have a trouble with that. Our system does not really allow that at this point. But because there's strength in numbers, we can actually, as a movement, change that we can actually grow and not be excluded from growth in the economy.
Just read a survey that came out from American Express, I believe it was last week, and it talked about Gen Z and millennials. So basically the people born between 1980 and 2010 tend to be a little bit more entrepreneurial than Gen Xers like me. And they are starting businesses right after college at rates much higher than Gen X or baby boomers. It's something like 20% of founders said that they started their business right after college versus about 3% of these older generational cohorts. Are you feeling that too with your students and your graduates? Are they foregoing sort of a traditional career path, working for someone else and hanging up their shingle right away?
It's funny. It's interesting you should ask that because you see, one of the things I changed in me helping to build this business school is that when the student comes to us in the first semester, I basically give this talk in the first. I insist that I'm the first professor they get, and so I start with this conversation with them to say, business is the only degree you can get without ever doing it. You would never go to other, like you can get an MBA without ever running a business, but would you go to a doctor who's never had a practice, like never had to practice this and do this themselves while they're in school? In business, that's, for some reason, we say business is all just theory and hearing things. And so, and the other comparison I make is that you would never, business is a bit like swimming. Everybody can do it, but you won't learn it on dry ground. You have to do it to learn it. And so on the first day of business school or of college, really, I start a business with every single student in my class. And they say, well, you know, and immediately people go, well, I don't know. I don't even have an idea. You know, the most important thing about a business is not the business idea. It's about doing it. And there is nobody. I've had 1,500 students now in 10 years. I've never had a student who couldn't start a business, because business is such a simple equation that we make this, you know, business school and everything, they make this way more complicated. It's almost like justifying business school by making business really, really complicated, whereas it's easy. Business is captured in one sentence. How may I help you? Just ask that. I love when you get into a room and say, how may I help you? It has everything in it. It has you in it. It has me in it. That's all we need for an economy, for a business. The question is, I have talents. I just have proclivities, natural talents, and everybody has them. And if I create with my talents something for you that you value, So I solve a problem, I fix an issue, I satisfy a desire that you have. And I do this by adding more value, by basically make you willing to pay more for it than it costs me to make it, to provide this service or create this product. We call that profit. And then you have a business, right? But the trick of a school, of a business school, should be to or any school, to help you find your talents. Don't like the education should be first the exploration of the miracle of the human being, of saying, what are these God-given talents that you have, which make you completely unique in the world? So let's first do this. The second thing is, what demand could this satisfy, right? That how may I help you? And then once you know that, let me then come in as a professor and teach you the skills to translate these talents into the value on the other side. That's business school, the skills, because skills is something you learn. Talent, you don't learn, you have it. You can get better at it, and that has to do with the skills. So my impression is that once I do that with the students, I probably have a disproportionate number of students who jump in right away, because you take the mystery out of it. Because a lot of I don't want to say a lot, I don't want to overblow this, but I have many students who paid for their entire education with the business they started in the first business school. Wow. Maybe we could start a trend to sort of say, finance your own education by what you do, because, creating money, making money is not that difficult as people think or say it is.
Well, one of the things I love in your book, The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, is you talk about to work is to create, and to create is to be human. And this sounds like what you're sharing with your students, is that creating is a human act. It's something all of us can do. And maybe we just need to be given the confidence, the encouragement, and the sort of guidelines or support to do that. I guess, what would you say to folks who are thinking about being entrepreneurs, who might not think that they have the ability to create, that they don't have that entrepreneurial spirit? What would you say to them to convince them otherwise?
If somebody pays you for your work, long term, that is because your work is more valuable than what they're paying you, right? That's otherwise the company will go out of business. And even in a nonprofit, they give you at least as much of what your work is worth, but probably more. So you're probably creating more value than you're getting out of your day job. My point to you is very simple. You should never work paid by the hour or paid with a salary. You should always be paid in return for the value you create. And everybody creates value. I mean, some of the value is immeasurable. Like if I say I'm a dad or I'm a mom who educates a child and brings the child up to maturity, to adulthood, that's immeasurable, right? So let's put that aside. Those things, taking care of your elderly parent. I was just with my mom who's 90 years old. Immeasurable money. Like, so that is so high that this is in a different category. But let's say our day job, when we go and we run a school, or we run we create, we're even in an office and we create order in that office or so. What we do by what we're doing is we're abdicating responsibility on the one hand, but what we're really doing is we're letting go of a portion of the value we add by giving it to somebody else, because I'm an employee, because I don't want the risk if one day I'm not creating enough value. Because of this risk aversion, I commit to a job where I get less money than the value I create. Do you see what I mean? And so if we're comfortable with risk and responsibility, we should never work for a job where we get a fixed income. We should always seek to create a job or create an opportunity where we make the money in relation to the value that we create. And if you do that, you should never work for anybody else. You work with other people.
Right. And I have the great privilege of being able to spotlight on this podcast many of the entrepreneurial parents and teachers who have left jobs, including a large majority of them who left jobs as conventional public school teachers to launch a new school or a new learning model because they felt like they could do it better, that
Yeah.
they were as trapped in a one size fits all schooling system as their
Mhm.
students and felt like they could do something different. And I know one of the other principles that you talk about in your book is to always think like an entrepreneur. So some of that, of course, is this value creation and thinking about how you can add value to others. What are some other ways that you could think like an entrepreneur?
Think of your life as a portfolio. I I love this term. Think as an entrepreneur, or always think like an entrepreneur, is in a way the creation of a portfolio career. And what you do is, if you look at your talents that as a business, I want you to look at your whole business work life as a business in a sense. And what you want to do is optimize revenue, because what I can do, I look at my own at my talent. So I'm very outgoing, I'm very personable, I have a gift of communication, I think, and I have high risk tolerance because actually I failed so much in life, in early life, that the one thing I do is never stop. Like I
Mm.
I have to be run over by a truck in order for me to stop on an effort, because failure does not demotivate me, it motivates me, you know? And so how can I now say, how can I create value for others? Well, the one thing is I can teach and give the enthusiasm to the other to my clients, which are the students, but also my knowledge of the past. So I have that as a part of my revenue model, right? And what I mean now with the portfolio is to go back, and I just use me as an example. I go back and say, oh, what else? It's almost like if you have a resource, you say, what else? What else? What else? You could do with this piece of wood, right? So I have that. What else? Well, I could coach business people or high, CEOs. So I coach CEOs in leadership and vision creation and not endurance, but like to bring form and shape to their leadership. What else? Well, I look at that and say, well, that's a CEO, and they pay a lot of money to get one-to-one coaching or so. What about somebody maybe not that at that level of what the company would pay this much, and they'd have to pay it themselves and so on? Well, can I do something coaching on for a group on a Zoom call, and then it's much less money? Or can I go and do a conference? I just was in Dallas and I gave a workshop to something like 100 people, and say, well, if everybody pays a little bit, it's, that's, and again, that's a part of the portfolio of how I can create
Mm.
value for others. Whenever you think value, think money, right? Because that's our transfer value. What else? Well, I could go give talks at organizations. So I start doing that. What else? Well, I could write books. I'm doing that. And can you see how I keep going? Don't be focused on one thing. If you have this one raw material, which is your talent, start to look at different skills you can add to this to create, to satisfy different market segments. I teach something called the business model canvas, which is actually interesting to use in an educational setting, because the business model canvas is sort of it has a value proposition in the middle, and it goes with this portfolio from each market segment or value proposition one to the next, and you could have 5 or 10 of these, and then start to innovate with other measures of. People always think you have to innovate with the product. No, you can innovate with how you deliver it. I just told you that I can do this for a CEO for a lot of money. You can sell one product for $1 million or 1 million products for $1. It's the same to me. So what you do is, and then also to say, well, how are people going to pay for this, right? And then the business model canvas is say, how could you monetize this? And sometimes it may be that you go on Teachable and you get very little money, but you go all for the entire entire English language world, or you go on the Zoom where people talk, pay you directly or something like that. So what I'm looking at is even how people pay, right? Not just Maybe they don't pay me, maybe they pay somebody else, or maybe I can do this and the company sponsors. Like a company could sponsor me to talk about this and then pitch one of their products, and so that it's not the customer who pays for me for my time, but actually the company. You see what I mean? Like, you can
I
be
love it.
innovative in how you do this. And especially in education, guys, there's so much opportunity. Education is at a breaking point of, and again, people think it's a problem, but I actually think it's an opportunity. There is a paradigm shift. I know it's an overused term, but there's a paradigm shift. Something's breaking, and people are starting to find out, just like everybody who's listening to this. Something's broken, and you can't put it back together. So that means opportunity for us entrepreneurs. And don't solve everything. Go find your little tribe and create a perfect solution for them, and then go next, next, next. Create a portfolio. Don't do one thing and then that's what you offer. Sorry, I
That
get
is,
carried away, but this
it's
is the core of it, isn't it?
it's such great advice, Andreas, because I hear from school founders, very busy running their new, school or space, trying to, teach students and satisfy family needs. They will break even, maybe even make a slight profit, but it's not necessarily a path to wealth creation running a small school these days. And what you're saying is that is only one of your roles as an education entrepreneur. Start thinking more broadly about what other value you can provide to others. Maybe start a
Yeah,
podcast, maybe start doing presentations, maybe start selling curriculum, right? All kinds of different ways that you can position
yeah,
yourself
keep
as an
turning it.
entrepreneur.
Yeah. And look, stop, you folks out there, stop feeling so bad about profit. Turn the language.
Yes.
Profit is a measure of the value you create. How much value do you want to create? That's measured in how much people want to pay more for what you're giving, what you're providing, than it costs you. What if you, so I absolutely insist that you create the largest, greatest amount of profit you could possibly create with all of these different segments. What you do with this, if you want to be benevolent to society, everything, then distribute the profit afterwards. But don't make work that is not profitable, meaning don't create low value work. Value gets, our transfer value is money. It gets measured like this. If you don't get a larger margin, it means that you're not creating the value. I want you to create the value. If you want to do good and be good to your neighbor, take the profit and do the good afterwards. But do not compromise in the amount of value that you're creating.
So I'd love to talk a bit, Andreas, about business failure, because we know that roughly half of U.S. small businesses fail within their first 5 years. And, some of that obviously is just that they're not creating value, right? That their product or
Yeah.
service is not appealing to a wide enough consumer base. But I'm curious what else you find. What are some of the ways in which entrepreneurs, maybe set themselves up
Yeah.
for failure? What are their
Yeah.
common pitfalls?
So I can in part talk about myself. We all have these experiences. There's, of course, fear of failure. And the fear of failure makes you, let's say your business is a little ship, and you want to make the ship perfect because you put it before you put it in the water, because you're afraid it's going to sink, or people are going to say it's ugly, or this and that. And so therefore there's people who have a boat in their shop and they're polishing and everything and never put it in the water. That I've had that, and myself, it's the perfectionist in you, and then you never go out. So my approach is different. I had to break that. If I go ta-da and here it is, I will never produce it. It's a bit like a book, right? It's you can always do better. So what I do now is I have this image in my mind that all I want to create is a hull of a boat that doesn't leak. That's all. So create a product that goes out there, and what it means is his value is that it doesn't leak. Like it put a hull together that doesn't sink. That's the point A of your business. And most of you who listen to this, you probably have something that is the hull that doesn't sink, and then build the boat on top of that. Meaning, and this is the theory called the lean startup. I don't want you to finish and put a bow around it and then have the big unveiling ceremony. That always fails, or very rarely, does this succeed. What I want you to do is to build it as you use it. I get this from the software industry, where you get version 1, version 2, version 3, and it gets better. And but this fear of failure, I actually turned this. My last lecture in the semester with this in this business class, this entry-level business class I do with the students, my last lecture is called Failing into Success, because failing is what you make it. Failing is learning. I tell you, we were very successful with 2 companies. One was Dragon Systems and the other one FTP. And I couldn't tell you exactly why they succeeded. Yes, it was new technology and this and that, but at the end of the day, I don't know, right time, right place. I don't know. But I have like 10 other companies where I failed. And I can tell you exactly why they failed. And where I learned, it's prestigious. It's cool for me to say, hey, I was involved in the creation of speech recognition, of Siri that you have on the phone and everything. Yeah, that sounds great. And I do feel proud of it and everything. But at the end of the day, I didn't learn as much in that as I learned in all the companies I was in that failed, because they brought me to this. They're actually the places where you grow the most. And so I call this failing into success. And I'm not afraid of failure. I just want to do it quickly. And that's the idea of putting the hull in the. I want to know if there's a leak. I want to know right away. So develop the product as you sell it. I wouldn't even finish the hull before. A good survey to me, people say, well, do business surveys before. Well, here's my survey. I say, if I deliver this, would you pay for it? And they say yes. And so, okay, give me a down payment, because I don't want you to lie to me. Now, don't just call it pretty because I'm asking, but give me $20 down payment towards the delivery of this if I have it. Then you get truth. And then if you say, I need this many of those before I can actually commit to it and do it, then pre-sell and get $20 per person. I don't care how much, but then you won't get lies. And then when you put the whole together, it won't sink, because you get the revenue and it justifies the whole thing. So just this proactive failing into success approach, and iteration is key.
Such great advice. The sort of concept of an MVP, right? A minimum viable product that you're starting with, that might not be the perfect solution that's in your mind, but that is something you can test in the market and see if folks want. And I see this in the world of education entrepreneurship, where you might have, say, a public school teacher who wants to create his or her own school, but is afraid to kind of take that leap into a long-term lease and figuring out how to recruit students, and instead starts with a summer camp or a vacation camp or an after-school program or a tutoring service, and just see if there is a demand for that. Kind of build up your brand and build up your product line, and then iterate from there, as you're saying. But just get started is such great advice.
And you start in a niche. There's this famous guy, Kevin Kelly. I'm a huge fan of this guy, Kevin Kelly. He started Wired magazine. He's literally the most interesting person alive. You check him out. He looks a little like Abe Lincoln with his beard, but he is such an interesting guy. And he came up with this idea of 1,000 true fans. And it comes out of the music industry. And, it's not exactly this number, but he says, when you're creating a product, if you're a musician, all you need is what he calls 1,000 true fans, because if 1,000 people buy what you're selling, you have a business. But people usually start a business and they say, oh, they think they have to be Walmart. How would I be heard out there and all these millions of people, and I'm trying to appeal to everybody? No. Can you find a tribe of 1,000 people? And it's probably with the school, it's even less. I mean, how many people do you need in that school? So can you create something that appeals to 50 people? Make everybody else go away. So I used to run a business strategy company, and our key question was always, who are you not going to serve? I don't want to know who you would sell to. Who would you not sell to? Because otherwise we want to be everything to everybody, because implicitly we say, oh, I want revenue, so I'll take any dollar. But you know what? Not every dollar is equal. It's the customer that counts. I can give you, I can float your first year of your school, but be such a pain of a customer and so disruptive to that vision that you have that I'm actually going to destroy you. You see what I mean? Even though, okay, and so my $10,000 I give you, is that a good $10,000 or bad $10,000? Bad. So remember that you choose the customers before they choose you. So find that little tribe and find out, what can I do for them? What's their problem? What's their pain? What's their situation? And make it unique, and then give them a solution they can't resist. And I give you a very off the wall kind of idea on this. In how do you find a tribe, like such a specialty segmented market? And I go through a system with our students that basically, it's too long to explain here, but it basically takes all of these different possible ideas for your business that you could do a business in. So if you're listening to this and you're an education entrepreneur, what would be 3 different segments, the top 3 different segments, and think of like, not just school as in I'm going to teach these primary school kids, but also what am I going to teach and what are you solving? What problem are you solving? And so maybe there could you do this for corporations? Could you do this for adults? Could you do this for children? And teach totally different things. And then create your number 1, number 2, number 3 option. And then the challenge I pull out of the hat sort of is, I say, talk about option number first. And they say, well, I would do this, travel thing. And the students would talk about, I want to do a travel site about going to Spain and France. And that's what I know. And I used to live there. And they talk about all this. Okay, what's your second best idea? Well, I'm into magic tricks and I love that. And so they go into that. And they talk about how they could talk about famous magicians and stuff like this. And then the third and the fourth. And the way you find a segment is to combine number 1 and number 2. Off the wall. Spain and France, magic tricks. How would you put the 2 together? Now you're segmenting, because now you're going into the specialty market, which, guess what? Reduces the people who will follow. But in a smaller market, you have greater loyalty.
And greater value.
You see, now if you say, we're going to do magic travel to Spain and France, now you're in. Now you're starting to talk to people who will geek out on it, right? And that's counterintuitive, that we're trying to please everybody. But I don't want you to please everybody. I want you to say, who do you want to serve? And then tell everybody else to go away.
Amazing. So, Andreas, as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts or predictions for the future of K-12 education. I know you focus mostly at higher ed these days, but you're also a homeschooling dad. You homeschooled your own child through high school, who's now in college. So you have a perspective on unconventional, out-of-system education models or the future of learning. I'm curious what your thoughts are of how American education might change over the coming years.
I believe that it will segment. Again, there's a segmentation. So instead of coming more together, it'll fall more apart. There's, of course, the political issues in it. That it's like with all things, today, public education is no longer about education. It's about the people it's a self-licking ice cream cone of the people who provide it now become the custom. Right? And so now it's more about the system and the teachers and the self-preservation than it is for the actual customer, which is the student and the outcome. But I think we're at an inflection point where this is going to start to change. And it's not that there's going to be a mass exodus, but it's enough of a flow. It's not a trickle anymore. It's enough of a flow, especially into homeschooling, that people are starting to take responsibility. And this is what I love about America, that Americans actually will take the risk and say, okay, we're out of here. We're going to do this ourselves. And that will create segmentation within education, which allows, whenever you have segmentation and an increase of choices for the customer wins. And so what you're going to see is better, well-rounded, educated young Americans, because they have received the individualized education that we were privileged to give our children. And so they come out with a stronger awareness of their talents, a better fitted set of skills to create productivity and value in the market. And you will see that will be a surge of alternative models in education. Technology and all of that is just supercharging this. The question is a bit finding this out in terms of the policies, where the government comes in and says it's a self-preservation on their side to say, no, you're not allowed to do this. Where I come from, homeschooling in Switzerland is disallowed, right? But that's not going to happen in the United States. The question is more, how much freedom do we have? And I think that will only increase, no matter what's going to happen politically, but that will only increase because of the demand. I also find that the college degree itself is going to become a little more relative, because knowledge is so ubiquitous with AI and with the internet and everything, that the true benefit of education is going to be the awareness of your talents and the understanding of the customer. And those two things is not what college has so far, and school has so far always focused on regurgitating what you know, hearing something and then regurgitating it back to you. Now the future is more about creativity and originality. And so I think that's going to change the college and higher university side. And we did actually, if I may put this one plug in, create a high school program of entrepreneurship we do it for Catholic homeschoolers and Catholic schools. And again, what I'm doing is narrowing the focus. So it's nothing offensive that a non-Catholic wouldn't like or so, but it's just what I'm doing is, again, narrowing the focus. So this is a high school program called the SEED program, CEDE, and you can find it online or on our website, and it's free. Like, homeschoolers can use this, and it's sort of this idea that I'm teaching here, adapted for high schoolers. And I think this entrepreneurial education is steeping closer and closer back to kindergarten and preschool, because it's a change in how we educate children, from the children to be more aware of the other and of their own talents and how they create value.
And of course, there's research to show that entrepreneurial parents raise children who are more entrepreneurial. So maybe as we see a burst in American entrepreneurship more generally, we'll see that cascade for generations to come. So Andreas, what is the best way for my listeners and viewers to learn more about that curriculum product that you've created, or to follow your work?
So we are at the Catholic University of America. So if you put in Widmer, W-I-D-M-E-R, and Catholic University of America, I'm easy to find. I run a place called the Stioka Center, which is the Center for Principled Entrepreneurship. And in it, we offer all kinds of programs, both for before college and post-college, around this idea of principled entrepreneurship. But specifically for pre-college, we have this program called the SEED, Catholic Entrepreneurship and Design Experience, CEDE program. And you can easily Google that and find that. And then if you connect with me on social media, LinkedIn or something, and just, I constantly advertise the new kind of stuff that we're producing, and I'd love to hear from you all.
Amazing. And the book, again, is The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, available wherever books are sold. Andreas Widmer, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for what you do and the entrepreneur that you are.